those were kind of the great people that I got to be part of their team to help us do what we did, to help you do what you did. So just some of the stories from the old days from some of your guys, and I wish more of them could be here, but there were some great people, and logistics is critical because, you know, like Patton found out when he's trying to run across France, when you're out of gas, you can't, I don't care how many bullets, you know, how fast and hard you can go and shoot. If you don't have gas, you can't go anywhere. It's the same thing for anything the infantry does. Without the means and the bullets and the gas and the medical supplies, we as infantry can't do our job. And luckily we have some really brilliant logisticians that made things happen. So, thank you.
This is sort of the part of the evening I'm not sure I hate or I love. I'm going to talk about why we're here and the induction tomorrow and my particular part of it. The key thing is it's our part, it's not my part. I absolutely truly believe that each of us are a result of our life experience in our associations. It's who we know, who we've met, the experiences we have that becomes distilled in each of us that determines what we ultimately are at this given point in time. None of us started the way that we are now. We all changed and adjusted and did certain things a certain way because of the influences that we had as we went along. You know, think to yourselves all the names and faces you can't remember but had a lasting effect on you, whether it was from a teacher to the guy you just worked with, or a woman you met across the shop the other day, or the experiences you had when you were wearing a uniform. We all wear a uniform for less time than we don't. And so each of us has experiences born of both the uniform and the civilian experience. This particular induction is simply a recognition, I think, of that. I truly believe that if I were to say that, you know, what I am standing in front of you today, why I have been given this particular recognition, it's a distillation of not only all of you, but all of the things and experiences that I have had through my life. And I'd like to focus a little bit about my experience in uniform, because that is what you saw and what you affected. I didn't tell you who or what or why we did certain things a certain way, but it was because of these people and things that I met along the way to where we came together in this particular battalion and did what it was we did, and really the glue that brought all you here today. It's very rare that units have alumni of this size and this engaged. And the reason for that is because each of you experienced a unique opportunity and situation here while you were in that small microcosm that Dave was talking about. In my particular case, it started with Second Lieutenant Nightingale, ironically enough commissioned 6 June 1965. Arriving here at Fort Bragg in B Company 2505. And there I was for the first time really introduced to the military. Though I was an Army brat, my dad went to World War II in Korea, I wasn't really cognizant of what military was all about at that time, because he got out about the time my brain actually started semi-functioning, about Andrew's age. And so my first exposure to what I became and what you became was sitting behind the 2505 PT field on Friday afternoons at First Sergeant's beer call. That's when the Army actually drank beer. And we would have wandering through us General Gavin, General Ridgway, Ben Vandervoort, wartime commander of the 2505, and a gazillion NCOs and PFCs of World War II. And what they imparted to us in a very non-threatening, non-directive way was, hey, this is what it means to be an officer or an NCO or an enlisted in the airborne. This is what it means to be a soldier. This is how you do it. Sergeants do this, officers do that. And so you got kind of this jelly mind starting to mold on how you do this stuff. And that started me off to the road that we are here today. And that continued on with other associations that I had. We started out in the 52nd Ranger Battalions. Lieutenant Nightingale, advisor of the Vietnamese 52nd Ranger Battalion. And there I had the most unusual and probably foundational experience in my life for you guys. And that was with Major Win Hip, Ranger Battalion Commander. 24 June 1967, we went in with 450 Rangers. 10 hours later, we had 32. And his example was incredible. His professional demeanor throughout the entire action was incredible. We were finally pushed out to where we were reasonably secure, and I went around the perimeter. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning. We had landed at 1600 the previous afternoon. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, we were back where we started. And Captain Shine, the senior advisor, told me to go around and figure out where we are. He had no idea, nor did I. I went around the entire perimeter. I counted 32 people, including ourselves. And there was Major Hip smoking a pell-mell cigarette, reading a map, and trying to figure out how he was going to continue the attack against the people that we had just been engaged with. And throughout my entire tour, later as a senior advisor, he constantly mentored me, taught me, trained me on how to be an officer as a combat leader. Incredible experience under the most intense, to include TET in 1968, one very grinding urban Stalingrad-like experience. That never left me. And what it also did is it showed to me that any particular prejudice you might have about, race, creed, origin, economic status is totally irrelevant. The only thing that counts is the quality of the soldier when he's pressed. That, above everything, is the sine qua non of what makes you as a person. Everything else is just window dressing and irrelevant. The other one was, one of the other ones that made a very deep impression on me was Famous Lane. Some of you have heard this story. Famous Lane was a mess clerk, assistant mess guy in the 2505 when I joined it. He was built like the proverbial brick doo-doo house. And he was, because of his size, mess had 50 calibers. The mess company, the mess element was 50 calibers. And we went to the Dominican Republic, and he was up on a roof, and great big guy, and he was holding a 50 caliber. If you have any of understanding, a 50 caliber is a great big piece of metal. And he was being directed by Sergeant Ernst, who was a 17-year-old private in the German army in World War II, who was very familiar with fighter planes, but they were the other side. And we were being attacked by a fixed-wing rebel fighter. and Ernst was directing Lane on how to shoot, and Lane was an intuitive quail hunter. And Lane shot down and got credit for knocking out with his .50 caliber handheld a rebel fighter aircraft. Lane, however, that wasn't what made him in my mind. Lane spoke 3 words in a week, and it was a big event. Very quiet, very self-effacing. He was constantly taunted because of that. That was when the Army was still somewhat racially prejudiced. He went to Vietnam in my organization, and he was a mess guy. Mess guys don't have machine guns, right? He volunteered. He went to the first sergeant and said, I want to be a machine gunner. This is infantry, Vietnam. And the first sergeant said, you're crazy, man. You got a really good deal. You get to go back here, you know, ice cream, air conditioning, hot chow. I want to be a machine gunner. He picked up his machine gun and became an 11B machine gunner. You have to excuse me. The unit got trapped out on an open rice paddy, and there were 2 guys that were, I call them Georgia crackers for better of a term, and they had made a history in the unit of kind of harassing him, you know, poking his chain, giving him a hard time, and he never opened, never said a thing. And both of them were seriously wounded. They were just on the point that particular day out in the rice paddy. And Lane was the machine gun providing fire. Well, that was about 50 meters in front. And the bad guys were in the village on the other side, call it another 75 meters away. And nobody could get to these 2 guys out in the rice paddy, and the fire was going everywhere. And suddenly, Lane stood up and dropped his machine gun, which he probably should not have done, and just raced like a football halfback out there to the field, grabbed the 2 guys, one under each arm, raced back, and got into the line, and he was killed. He had 8 rounds put in his back, but he brought both those guys back. It was, sorry. But he showed me what it's like to be a quality person, and that was very important. I took all that back, and we joined, came back to the Army in Fort Campbell, and as you know, the Army was pretty much destroyed by then of Vietnam. And I had the opportunity to join the 1st Ranger Battalion, which is just creating. And I did, and I joined Colonel Casey Lure, who was our battalion commander, and a number of NCOs, first sergeants and platoon sergeants, a couple of squad leaders, because we started at 0, that really wanted to do right. The Army at that time was in disarray. It had lost its sense of purpose. It had no discipline. The officers didn't know what to do or how to do it. Leadership wasn't willing to take charge. And so Abrams created this thing called the Ranger Battalion. And the whole idea was, well, I'll create the Ranger Battalion with the best people we got. They'll figure out how to build a unit from scratch, and then they'll migrate to the rest of the Army and make the rest of the Army better. The rest of the Army, you may all recall, was drinking, smoking dope, and basically not doing anything at all. And that's what we did. For about a year, we created what was the 1st Ranger Battalion. But the point of all of this is I learned there, talking about associations, the concept of standards. You guys remember that term? Concept of standards. The concept of roles of NCOs and officers. This is what a sergeant does. This is what an officer does. You don't mix them up. And this is what happens when you put a unit together. You give it stress, but you also give it goals. And you challenge everybody in the unit to rise to those goals. Because when each one does that, the whole does it. The sum is better than the whole of the parts. And that's what happened with 175. And that's actually what I brought to you, though I didn't tell you that. Some of you inferred that, but that's basically what I did. And it wasn't unique to, oh, that's the Ranger deal. It's basic stuff. It's exactly what Gavin and Ridgway and the NCOs told me when I was a second lieutenant. But it really worked. And it's what, you know, they're using today. So that's tremendously important. I think back to then commanding the 2505 when I came in. And how many of you guys remember the day off I gave you?
Cool.
My very first command to you all was dismissed, you know.